We've been reacting to a couple of the big crime stories this week. The looting that we saw in Oxford Street, Southend, as a result of a viral TikTok, or TikTok is saying it actually started on Snapchat. I don't really care, to be honest, how it started, but it really does go to show what on earth is going on, especially in London. London is just some lawless hellhole at the moment. But also we've been, that got us talking about whether... I'm not going to use the term low level, Peter will get annoyed, but whether certain crimes that some might consider not as serious as others, is that all right to say, Peter? Some might consider less serious than others.
Cristo, I need to caution you, you have the right to remain
I never use my right to remain silent, though. I caution you on that. But no, and we were talking about whether there should be a more heavy-handed approach to some of those crimes. And talking of heavy-handed, we saw exactly that when it came to the autistic teenager who was arrested this week on suspicion of a homophobic public order offence. Now, Peter, help me out with that, because I was under the impression, and tell me if I'm wrong, but how can a public order offence happen in someone's private residence?
Yeah, the Public Order Act does not relate solely to public places. You can breach the Public Order Act in your own home with certain offences.
So does that mean that because there are other members of the public there, that's why it becomes public order, I guess? Yeah,
there are offences, as I say, under that Act, which apply to virtually any kind of location. It's not necessarily a Public Spaces Act.
Okay.
It's a Public Order Act. So what we saw here, and I've watched all the footage repeatedly, is an absolute appalling bit of policing, sadly. And of course, what senior police officers fundamentally do not realise is that a lot of policing cannot be learnt from books. You gain skills in policing through experience. But in recent years, foolish senior cops have said it's fine to have a healthy churn of police officers. In other words, cops come in, do the job for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and then disappear off to be train drivers or some other occupation. Well, that has caused untold damage to policing because we've got so many inexperienced cops on the front line, often getting it wrong. OK, for balance, they often get it right, but here we've got police officers undoubtedly overreacting to a few hurty words.
Well, that does seem to be the case, but let's take this to the extreme. Let's say that the police at the time wrongly didn't believe that this teenager was autistic, and that this was said in the most horrifically homophobic way. You know, you look like an awful old lesbian nana. I mean, it's difficult to say that in a homophobic way because it just makes me roll my eyes when I hear that. But what should have been the correct response? Renee and I were talking about this in the break, and we just said that. We just sort of said, well, Renee, say what you asked me.
I said, is that the best you've got?
Yeah, because Renee said...
I asked you if you would be offended if she'd have said, you look like my homo granddad.
Yeah, and I said, well, no, I said, if it was said in the most vile way possible, I'd probably roll my eyes. And what I would have liked to do if I was that police officer, which they're not allowed to do now, is to say, oi, steady, you're going to get clipped round the ear if you say something like that to me again, and move on. Or roll my eyes and say, God, is that the best you got? As Renee said, it seems so bizarre that was seen as something that would be considered, I guess, a hate crime.
But you see, you can't apply a fixed template to every policing scenario because no two scenarios are the same. When I was a uniformed police officer, I got loads of abuse from various people in different situations. Sometimes you would reply with a quip, sometimes you would reply with a wink, sometimes you might reply with a bit of a snarl, and sometimes, if it was part of greater criminality, you would draw your truncheon, steam in and arrest someone. You see, circumstances are different, and policing allows you to use your discretion, and that discretion is obviously and often based on your experience, how you've been taught. We have, in the Met now, 60% of frontline police officers have got less than 3 years' experience. We have probationary officers taking out other probationary officers to try and teach them how to do it. There is a lack of experience. With experience comes pragmatism. With experience comes wisdom. And sadly, I think that was sadly lacking in this case.
And also, I wonder as well whether the obsession that a lot of frontline services, blue light services, has with diversity and making sure that everyone's sort of included in language and making sure that all of those things, which, you know, on the surface would be seen as a good thing, but sometimes I think maybe it's gone a little bit skew-if, shall we say. I wonder if now that there is an immediate knee-jerk reaction. I've heard something that sounds like it might be homophobic if you said it in that context to that person, if they might have heard it. Therefore, I must act.
There are highly trained police officers who are working behind desks in the role of inclusion and diversity manager. The police have got themselves in a dreadful tangle over all of this because in recent years they've tried to be everybody's friend. And that, quite simply, is naive and is not what policing is all about. I would rather that officer was actually out on the front line dealing with people who were stealing from shops, stealing phones and stealing bikes. That would do a lot more for the diversity and the inclusion of police, because every single strata of society are victims of crime, no matter your colour, race, creed, sexuality, whosoever you may be. All these people suffer crimes. If the police were out there investigating those crimes promptly, professionally, to the best of their ability, then all of those communities would have greater trust in the police, have greater confidence in the police, and might feel a bit more inclined to join.
You see, to me, the role of the way in which diversity should be dealt with in the police force, there's two aspects of it, and it's the same for the NHS or something like that. Certain communities have certain crimes that might be more specific to them, and you need to just be trained to know that that might be the case. So that's one side of it. But also, on the flip side, certain communities and certain minorities, for want of a better word, might also be more... there might be more crimes that they are more likely to also commit. Those are the two sides which are actual practical within the job. I think that that's necessary because I'm just reminded of Stephen Port, the grinder killer. And, you know, what I don't want as a gay man is rainbow police cars. What I want is when there is a specific crime that might affect the gay community, like overdoses on the drug G, or which is the drug that, or misuse of it to kill someone, as with the case of Stephen Port, that the officers know that that's something that goes on. That's not a rainbow car. That is specific information which would help that particular minority when it comes to a crime that they are susceptible to. Would that be a fair analysis of what diversity training should be?
The Stephen Port case is an example of where inexperienced detectives got it manifestly wrong. Of course, there are, tragically, young men who are dead who now should be alive were it not for the, quite frankly, appalling investigations that went on to the first two killings by Port. That is inexperience. That is bad detective work, appalling detective work. And if some of that was based on presumptions because people had some kind of homophobic sort of attitudes, then it would have given me enormous pleasure to see them out of the door, never to darken policing again. Policing should be there for everyone. It doesn't have to be everybody's friend. What it does need to be is the enemy of every lawbreaker.
Listen, really good to talk to you, as always. Thank you, Peter, speaking a lot of sense, as always, this morning. West Yorkshire, when it comes to that particular story about the autistic teenager, has said that a 16-year-old had been arrested on suspicion of this homophobic public order offence, but the spokesperson urged people to avoid reaching conclusions solely on the basis of the social media video, which only provides a very limited snapshot of the circumstances of the incident. Oz Khan, the Assistant Chief Constable, said, "We are aware of video circulating on social media, which, as is often the case, only provides a very limited snapshot of the circumstances of this incident." Thank you for that. And another one here from Deborah in Seacroft, which is in Leeds, has also said, "Let's get this story right. It was her mum who rang the police to get her out the house. Please get this story right. No fault of the police," says Deborah in Seacroft. Yeah, but Deborah, if that were the case because she was vulnerable, or there was a reason why, there are a few different stories around why the police ended up at that house, and I accept that, but I don't think that takes away from the fact that the reason she was arrested was because of those words.